Hey everybody, Wayne here. In today's tutorial, I'm going to cover A Most Fearful Sacrifice, The 3 Days of Gettysburg, designed by Hermann Luttmann and published by Flying Pig Games. I have a recon or unboxing video. I will also have a playthrough of the first scenario, the Slaughter Pen, coming up probably a couple days after this goes up. So you get to see the game in action. This will just be a quick tutorial, well, semi-quick tutorial, kind of explain the game, do an overview of it. I will then run kind of through the sequence of play, explaining things, explaining how this game works. It is based originally on a blind sword system. It's similar to that. This is called the Black Swan system. Has similarities, but there are some key differences as well, and I will attempt to cover those. So let's go ahead and dive in. A Most Fearful Sacrifice is a hex encounter game built around activating formations using cards. The initial blind sword system used chit draw. Here you use card draw. Same idea behind it, slightly different mechanisms all around. You can play, in this game, you can play the entire 3-day Battle of Gettysburg, or more likely and probably more frequently, and thankfully, the game is broken up into many different scenarios in the very handy scenarios book. You will set up a scenario, generally use one of the two maps, maybe less than one of the maps. It'll tell you which hexes that scenario takes place within a certain game area. You will set it up. It will tell you where your counters go for each unit. There will be some that it will likely enter as reinforcements on later turns. It will tell you which core commanding cards and which other cards you're going to put in your deck. Now you're saying, well, Wayne, which cards? Say you're completely new to the system. What cards are you talking about? Very simple. So, like I said, it is a card draw driven game here. So you're not going to have a hand of cards. We're going to draw from a deck of cards. At the beginning of each turn, during what's called the command decision phase, you're going to create your deck of cards. Now, the scenario is going to tell you specifically which cards are going to be involved, so it's not like you're picking from all the cards that are in the game, so don't be overwhelmed at first. So say you start off with the first scenario and it tells you specific cards to have. You're going to be building your deck, and for example, for the Union, you may have Sickles' third core card. This card is going to go into the draw deck itself. Each turn, when you get to the card draw phase, and you're drawing your cards and you're going through them, you can draw anything from an event card, so it could be Union events or Rebel events, a Fog of War card, possible other cards, Friction of War card. There are the core activation cards, the CAC card, or CIC card, excuse me. So CIC card would be something like General Lee. So say you draw the core activation card for that particular draw phase. On here, it has numbers on the left. You're going to go ahead and roll a 1d6. When you roll a 1d6, it's going to tell you, say you roll a 3 or a 4. 1 brigade from DP number 1 plus Randolph artillery. What does that mean? Let me show you. Turn begins, besides the advanced game turn marker phase, which is obviously skipped in the first turn, begins with the command decision phase. During that, you are assigning your division activation cards to the division priority slots on the command displays for both the Union and the Confederates. You will then take a random event card. Out of the pile of random event cards per artillery brigade, you want to conduct extra preliminary bombardment with. Don't worry, I'll explain that in a minute. You will choose 2 key event cards, and then you will draw an additional random number of event cards per the scenario, reduced by 1 per event that you used for the artillery brigade extra preliminary bombardment. You're building that card draw pile that, like I said, it's card driven, right? Not card driven, but it's card activated, with 2 key event cards, the random number of event cards the scenario tells you to, your CIC card, Commander-in-Chief cards, so for example, General Lee, any Fog of War cards, Friction of War cards, and of course, the core activation cards. I'll describe the preliminary bombardment phase, although the actual combat I'll explain shortly. So during the preliminary bombardment phase, first a Union player, then a Confederate player can activate 1 artillery brigade, so 1 of your artillery units, and you get to use them for a fire combat. If you have taken random event cards out, you can go ahead and activate extra artillery, although only each artillery can only be activated once per this phase. After you completed the preliminary bombardment phase, you go to the card draw phase. The card draw phase and the activation phase that comes with it is the core of the game, the bread and butter of this game. You created your deck of cards during the command decision phase. You're now going to be drawing them. Union on odd number turns, Confederate on even. If you're playing solitaire like I do, don't worry about it. First off, if you draw an event card, and there will be events, as I talked about, the events you either choose, key events, or random events. And those are going to be things for either side, both Union and Confederates. So for example, a Union event card you could draw, good ground. It says hold, it explains what it does, and at the bottom it says default event. What does that mean? Very, very simple. You have the name of the event up top. You have whether it is hold or play immediately. Play immediately, you have to play it in some manner, whether it's this or the default event. If it says hold, you can go ahead and hang on to it up till possibly the end of the turn during the end phase. It then has an ability here. For example, this good ground is going to be where the Union is going to be placing a good ground chit on a Union-occupied hex. It's going to give them defensive advantages during fire and assault combat. Or, a key thing, if you do not want to use the event or you can't use it for its actual event, what you can do is what's called the default event. Any one unit may minimum move or issue a fire combat. So you can select a unit, it's either going to do one fire combat or it's going to conduct a minimum move. It allows you to always use your events, whether it's for what the event is written on here, or at least for some sort of minor action. After event cards, you may draw something like the Fog of War card. Fog of War card is a card that you're going to go ahead and roll on, and it's going to have some random events that kind of happen. Battlefield chaos, wayward movement, fortunes of war, strategic options, or casualties for the different generals. And depending either the rulebook or that scenario is going to tell you what exactly you're able to do or what it's going to happen. Now you can see the numbers you roll right here. And you're saying, let's see, 11, 13, 56 to 66. What does that mean? What that means is, and this is kind of the core of the game, is you're either rolling 2 or 3 dice depending. In this particular case, it's 2 dice. The black and the white. Count the black first. And you go ahead and just put them side by side, right? So 1 and a 5, that's not a 6, that's 1 and a 5, that's 15. So that would be Rebel, Battlefield Chaos. And you're going to be resolving the die rolls like that, generally black and white, black first, or possibly black and white, black first, and then also the red one. But that's when you get into the fire combat and you need a cohesion test, which again we will explain shortly. All right, now the main card that you're going to be looking for, not the most common, generally the events will be the most common, although it does depend on the scenario, will be your core activation card. And here I have it set up on the board here. The core activation card. So, for example, with the Union, we have Sickles. He's commanding the 3rd Corps. He's a poor commander. You can see it says core activation at the bottom. Now, what we did back in the command decision phase is we assigned our division activation cards to division priority slots. It didn't make sense before when I said it, right? Like, what does that mean? Very simple. You have your Union command display, and here you can see Sickles' 3rd Corps. So in this scenario, let's say we know that Sickles is our core commander, and he has these 2 particular division commanders, Ernie and Barnes, division activation card, and he is assigning them division priority 1, division priority 2. Now, depending on the type of leader he is, you may have a chance to activate 1, both, all, etc. Now, looking at Sickles in particular, if you can see, and 1 through 6, so you're rolling on a die, 1d6, to get whatever it is. So you never know, you're going to activating 1 brigade from DP number 1, which, division priority number 1, or you're activating more. Now, when it comes to Sickles, because he's a poor leader, if you notice, it's only DP1, division priority 1, all the way down. There is no chance to activate a 2nd division with Sickles. That is because he's a poor leader. Other leaders will allow you to activate up, 1 and 2, etc. You can even see Reynolds, Hancock, Sykes. They are all better leaders. They're going to have more division priority cards available to them and more that they're going to be able to activate. When you activate a division, you then go to that card on the command display. So say with Sickles, you draw him, you roll, and you get to activate, let's say you roll a 5, and you get Division Priority number 1 plus Randolph's Artillery. Now, Division Priority 1, you had already assigned, right, during the command decision phase, Barnes. So now go ahead and look at the Barnes card. Now, he is going to need a roll as well. So go ahead and roll 1d6, and again, what are you looking at? You're looking at, now he's a poor leader, so unfortunately for him, a 1, no orders. You're not going to be able to assign any orders to any of your formations this turn. 1 brigade, division group, etc. Now, there are other options. There's division by brigade, which will allow you to assign individual orders. But what you're doing at that point, you're realizing how many brigades can you activate, or can you activate the entire division? And in this case, can you activate the division, all of them, by giving them an order that applies to all of them? Or, because he's not a good leader, if he was a good leader, it may say division by brigade, in which case he could activate every brigade in the division, but give each of them a different order. And now you're saying, what do you mean by orders, Wayne? Well, let's go to the activation phase, and we'll talk about that. Now, when you're in the activation phase, first off, you identify any activated formations. So like we said, right, is it going to be just the brigade? Is it going to be the entire division? A single brigade? Is it going to be artillery and division, etc.? It's explained on the card. Now, artillery, very quickly, are handled differently than the rest of the units. Artillery do not take a specific order. They do not follow the brigade division order system. What they do, very simply put, the artillery, you'll either have them move or you'll have them conduct a fire combat, and that is it. Now, orders. So right here, we have Barnes' division and Vincent's brigade. So assuming that Barnes, and now let's look at the units because I want you guys to understand them. Top right, BA, that's for Barnes. So that is that division leader. And remember, above Barnes is Sickles, but it's not listed on the counter. And then for the actual units here, they are Vincent's brigades, right? So these infantry, as you can see, they look like infantry, represent Vincent's brigade units. Now the numbers on here, very simple, strength points and cohesion rating. We'll get into them as we get into the combat. Strength points are going to affect both the fire combat and the assault combat. And the cohesion rating, same deal. It's going to affect both of them when it comes to rolling the red die. So say you have your units right here as a union, and you get that activation. Now you're activating Barnes units, so Vincent's brigades. You want to give them an order. You can do either one of 3 orders: attack, defend, maneuver. You go ahead and pick the order you want. Now again, depending on how the activation went, it may be everyone has the same order, or maybe each unit can have a different order. It just depends on how good of a leader you have. So in this particular case, it had to be the same, right? It had to be the division group. So the entire division is activated. So if there were more brigades than just Vincent, say there were also, and I don't have one on hand. I thought I did, I do not. But say there were additional brigades, so they weren't named Vincent, but they had the BA in the top right, they'd be able to activate as well with this same order: attack, defend, or maneuver. Obviously, you get a pretty good idea what they do. Attack, you're going to be able to conduct fire combat, which you do before movement in this game. You conduct movement, and then depending on the order, attack, defend, maneuver, it changes how many movement points each unit has. You would then conduct an assault combat step if you are adjacent to an enemy. And then for an order, there's a rally step, but if you're under attack order, you would skip the rally step. That was attack. If you're on defend, you can do fire combat, and you can move. You do not do assault combat, but you do rally. And finally, maneuver, basically you're just going to be maneuvering around. One key thing as well, only during the attack can you engage an enemy. What does that mean? Engage, very simple, become engaged to them. Engagement means you move adjacent to the enemy. All right, so I mentioned the orders, you're giving an order. So say you're giving an order of attack order to both of these. First off, like I said, would be fire combat. Now, he here would be able to shoot law, right? So Vincent's unit here would be able to shoot law. Vincent here, the 4-4, would not be able to because his line of sight is blocked. You're going to trace line of sight. You're also going to check range, right? So during fire combat, first thing would be determine range. You check your weapon range table. Infantry could shoot up to 2 hexes away, assuming line of sight doesn't block it, which that's the second thing you check. Very simple. You check from the center of the firing unit's hex to the center of the target unit's hex. Hex sights also count for line of sight. Third, strength points firing. How many strength points are firing? Is it, say, just this unit with 9? Are there 2 units that are stacked together that are combining their fire? It's called coordinated fire. 2 or more units into adjacent hexes. So everyone in the same hex, no matter what, or 2 or more units in 2 adjacent hexes combined into one fire if they're the same brigade. So say they were set up like this. Since Vincent, right, they're both the same brigade, they're able to combine their fire, combine their strength points of 9 plus 4, 13 when firing against this unit. Then you look at column shifts. Now there's quite a bit of column shifts, and it's fairly standard, but it'd be things like, okay, what's the range? Which in this case, they can fire up to 2, but really, Civil War, right, American Civil War ranges should be close to this. If he was firing from here to here, he'd be using regular no column shifts. However, from here, it would be considered long range, which would be 2 negative column shifts. Again, I'm not going to run through every single column shift. There is a handy player aid chart to keep track of it, but things like range, things like what terrain is he in? Here it's clear terrain, no issues. Well, what if he's in an orchard? What if he was in rocky woods? What if he was in regular woods, etc.? Those things would probably benefit the defender if he was under attack. Finally, you check the CRT itself. I'll go ahead and have the CRT pop up, and then I'll explain how the combat works. All right, so say we're conducting a fire combat, and this is a scenario right here. We've activated Vincent for an attack order. He's conducting a fire combat. We're going to target Law's unit right here. We're going to do coordinated fire since we have 2 units from the same brigade adjacent, or again, any of the same. Doesn't have to be the same brigade if they happen to be stacked together. We've determined range first off, which we're adjacent at this point, so no negatives to that when it comes to the column shifts. Line of sight, no need to worry about line of sight. Again, pretty standard. Check the rulebook for examples. Things like the woods are going to block it, rocky woods, etc. Hillsides, they're going to block those, right? Common sense, they would block it anyway. Strength points, go ahead and add it up. So we have 9 plus 4 is 13. No negatives for that. It'd be just add them all up to 13. Again, we check our column shifts, and we have our CRT. So again, I have the CRT popping up. You can see with the CRT, you're going to have how many strength points are up top. Now the max number from the strength points on them will tell you is 10. So you can see the 10 plus column. You would go ahead and just mark it at 10. You know, whether you use something to put it, I usually use a cube. I have a blue cube when I'm playing and conducting attacks for the Union, and a brown or butternut cube when I'm conducting attacks for the Rebels. Maybe mark it at the 10, right? Then you check your column shifts. Again, where's the target, what's the range, etc. You're going to figure out exactly where we're going to end up on there, and then you go ahead and roll. Now what you're going to do, you're going to roll all 3 dice. Say we stayed on the 10. Let's go ahead and roll 3 dice. All right. So we got a 35 with the 6, for the cohesion rating. So what does this mean? Very, very simple. Look down the CRT on the 10. Check down the column for 35. 35 is an R in yellow. That's routine. There's the white, NE, no effect, E, easy, R, routine, T for tough, S for severe, C for critical. So very simple. We got an R for routine. So we check the fire combat cohesion test. No matter what, whatever you roll, there's going to be cohesion test. It may be nothing may happen, but something may happen. So now you've just basically said, oh, we have the chance of a hit. We've caused a R, yellow, routine hit, or possible hit. What do we do to determine if anything happens? We now check that cohesion die, and that's why it's rolled at the same time. It speeds up play as it's already ready to go. So now you take the cohesion die that you rolled, in this case 6, you check it against cohesion rating on the counter. Now, a very key rule to remember is unit support. If a unit does not have a unit from its brigade adjacent or stacked with it, it's going to be unsupported, in which case that number is not its cohesion rating. It's actually going to be 1 less. That printed number assumes it has support. So that 4 is actually a 3. So 6 plus 3. That's a 9. So check down the R for routine. All the way down to 9. NE, no effect. Okay, fair enough. They engaged in fire combat. However, they weren't able to do anything. Now let's say it had been 55. Now, By the way, when you roll doubles like that, there's also an optional rule to have random events happen. I usually choose not to do it, but it is in the rule book that you can do that. So either way, in this particular example, because we don't want to get into that, we're not going to worry about random events. So say you rolled a 55, but the same for the 6. So 55 under the 10 is now S, severe. Uh-oh, bad news for the rebels. So now you check the S, the red, the darker red. Scroll down, because they still had a 6 plus 3, they still had a 9. What's that? SH and then SK1 in parentheses. What that means is they're going to be shaken, so they will get a shaken marker. -1 strength point, -1 cohesion rating. Go ahead and place it under, that way you can see the beautiful artwork on the unit. In addition, in parentheses means you can take an SK1, which what does SK mean? Skedaddle. Fun word, right? So basically means you can retreat 1. You may say, well, I don't want to retreat. Well, maybe you don't want to be assaulted because say, for example, they've now done fire combat. If next thing besides movement, right? So it's fire combat, movement, and then assault combat. So say you're thinking, I don't want to be assaulted by these 2 units, especially now that I'm shaken. I want to go ahead and back up. You may take your skedaddle result and take it as a defender and go ahead and say, I know what, I'm going to retreat. I'm going to retreat to this hex here. They do not get to advance. They only get to advance after if it had been during an assault combat. Now, say you didn't though, right? You just took the shaken and you're like, I'm good. I'm standing strong. I'm not going to take the skedaddle. Well, the next step would be movement step. Remember, fire combat, then movement, then assault. And they're saying these are the only that's active, and they're saying we're not going to move anywhere. We want to engage in assault combat. So next step here would be the assault combat. Now, assault combat is handled similar, but a little different. Here's how it's done. You declare your attacks ahead of time for the attacker. In our case, it's very, very simple. You're literally just attacking here. We're going to go ahead and say that we're going to have attack support. So it'll be this hex attacking that hex. So we have the assault hex versus the defending hex. And then we're going to have attack support coming from this unit right here. This will help with the SP odds advantage, strength point odds, and envelop column, although it would not be enveloped because it'd be attacked from at least 3 hexes, which is only 2. All right, and there's a lot of rules when it comes to like assault hex, defending hex, one eligible attacking hex can attack 1 eligible adjacent, only 1, they can't change your target later, etc., etc. We're teaching you the game, but we're not getting into every little nuance. All right, so we picked our attack, assaulting hex, defending hex. He'll be providing support. You can resolve them in any order you wish. We only have 1, so we're going to go ahead and resolve that one first. Now, withdrawal before combat. If the defender is cavalry, horse artillery, or sharpshooter, they may automatically withdraw before combat begins, and the game tells you exactly how many hexes they can withdraw, and they will not suffer any sort of fire. Now we do assault combat strength and defending hex combat strength. That's right. For assault combat, you're determining both. Very simple. What it is you figure out the strength points. So 9 plus 4. This would be 9, except he's shaken, -1 SP, so really it's only 8. On the CRT, you're going to go ahead and mark where it is. Again, this is why I like to have, say, a cube for blue, a blue cube, and then a butternut or brown cube, so we can keep track of both at the same time. Now you're going to go through the column shifts. You're going to figure out all the different column shifts there are, and there's quite a bit for assault combat. Key ones are, the main key ones I would say are the terrain of the defender, in which case this is clear terrain, so it's not doing him any favors. And then the other two, the main ones, although there are multiple, and terrain includes like things like the slope, right? Are they attacking uphill or not? But what is the odds advantage, if there is one, and the cohesion rating advantage? So for instance, we had 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, right? 13 strength points attacking 8. Well, that's not double, but that is 3-2 odds advantage. Therefore, the attacker would get a right column shift of 1. So because he has more men, right? And the more men you have, it's going to be up to 3-1 odds or greater, which is 3 column shifts to the right, which is a pretty big deal. The other one that's a big one is comparing the cohesion rating. In this case, we have 3. There's 4 here. His 4 is actually marked down. First off, he's unsupported, so it's a 3, and -1 because of the being shaken, so that drops to a 2. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to compare the cohesion rating to the 2, and whatever that differential is, you're going to go ahead and move that many column shifts to the right. Again, very simple, but it's a very key part. Now you got all your column shifts in, right? Now we didn't go ahead, I didn't configure them right now. We're just going to go ahead and assume that you figured them out. Now you know exactly where the attacker and where the defender is on the CRT. What do? You actually, forget that red die from earlier, the cohesion rating, right? Cohesion test, excuse me. That is done for fire combat. In assault combat, you're going to roll the black and white just like you would fire combat. Only this time you're rolling for each side. So for example, the Union here got 63. The Confederates got 21. Now what you do when you check the CRT, and you look down and you see what type of cohesion test result they got. That's basically their CRT result. So for example, say the Union was at 10 on the CRT and say the Confederates were at 5. I don't believe that's actually what it is. I'm just using that as an example quick, just to explain it. 63 on the 10 is going to be a C, critical. Now you check the assault combat results matrix, and you can see for the attacker, what's their CRT result, all the way over to C, critical. Make a note of that. You then, and again, that's why I use the keys to keep track. And then 21 on the 5. That is only an NE. No, that's an NE, no effect. So you go ahead and check the C down, and then the NE from the defender, and you look over, it says D, a crushed. So the defender is crushed. That means he is automatically eliminated from the game. He's not flipped over to his battle-worn side. He's not just given another shaken marker, although he already had one. So if he's given another one, it would actually remove that one and flip him over to his battle-worn side, etc. That is a really bad result for the Rebel, and now the Union crushed him. They get to go ahead and conduct what's called an attacker breakthrough and move into that hex appropriately. And they would not suffer defensive fire, which, by the way, defensive fire, something that would be if you move and you engage somebody, make sure you don't forget defensive fire. So that would be back during, remember, you do fire combat first, then you do movement. So movement, let's say this unit had moved here. He wants to move adjacent. Say he did his fire combat, nothing happened. And he moves adjacent because he knows he wants to conduct an assault. Now that he moved adjacent, he is now engaged to this infantry. The 9-4 of law will go ahead and conduct defensive fire, which is basically standard fire combat against Vincent's unit. All right, that is assault combat in a nutshell. Rallying, very simple. Say that you had a defend order, and so he is right here. He's not adjacent to any enemy units. He would go ahead and automatically be able to remove that shaken marker. Also, possibly a unit that's off the map would possibly be able to be returned to the map, depending on how that goes. So you've made it through the activation phase. You've conducted you've given orders, conducted any combats, movement, etc. Now you do the end phase. Any of those event cards that you had drawn that you decided to hold, you can now play them. You alternate back and forth, Confederates first. You then check for victory. If it's the last game turn, check the scenario victory conditions. It may be holding 3 different hexes, or who holds the majority of those 3 hexes, right? So who holds 2 out of 3, etc. And then if it's not the last game turn, you return to the advanced game turn marker phase at the beginning and go from there. All right, so quick recap. You've advanced your game turn marker, or it's the beginning of the scenario. Command decision phase. Now that you guys have understand everything, right? Command decision phase. You're assigning those division activation cards to those slots, right? Determining which units that you think you're going to be potentially able to activate. You're then taking event cards out if you have any extra artillery for extra preliminary bombardment. You choose 2 key event cards, ones you might want. So you might want to have the hot-headed revs, or good ground, or stand to it, etc. Right? Ones you know you want. And then there's going to be a number of random ones. And then you build that card draw pile with those event cards, ones you picked in the random, any CIC card, fog of war card, friction of war card, and of course, your core activation cards. You then go to that preliminary bombardment phase, where you're going to activate 1 of your artillery for fire combat, or if you've discarded extra events and you have more than 1 artillery, because remember, an artillery can only activate once during this phase, you'll go ahead and activate them for fire combat, possibly more. Then you move on to the card draw phase, bread and butter of the game. Start drawing those cards. You get events, hold them or play them. You get your You draw your core activation. You're going to go ahead and roll. It may be rolling again on here, or it may tell you exactly what you're doing. Activating, your entire division. Each brigade gets a separate order. Entire division, but only with one order for everyone equally, which means you have some units that may not be able to do anything because of their circumstances on the board. Whatever the orders are, you're given those same steps of you can conduct fire combat if they're eligible, movement if they're eligible, which they all can move, but maybe it might depend on, are you in defensive, a defense order, or defend order, in which case you can't move adjacent or you can't engage, so you may be limited on your movement. Then you're going to do the assault combat step, any assault combat eligible units, and end phase, and again, and repeat. Hopefully, this is a nice, quick, dirty tutorial, covers things, at least gives you an idea of kind of the function of the game, how the game at its core works. I went through a little bit of combat, some mock scenarios, super simple mock scenarios, right? In reality, as you're playing, you'll probably end up with a little bit more questions. Just remember the order. It's going to be fire first, then movement, then assault. With that combat, fire combat, you're checking range, checking line of sight, adding up strength points, checking column shifts, finding that final CRT column. You're resolving it with fire combat with all 3 dice. Black first, so black and white create 54, create 32, etc. But you're also rolling the red die, and that is going to be cohesion test, and it's going to be combined with the defensive units, the defending units cohesion rating, and don't forget unit support, or lack thereof, to find out what result actually happens, and then what is going to happen to them. So the severity of the cohesion test is determined by this, and then the result on that severity table is determined by this with their cohesion rating. And then same for assault combat, only go ahead and get rid of that die. And then both sides determine your strength points, determine exactly who can attack, etc. But once you have your strength points, once you have your column shifts, all that, each side's going to roll black and white, or roll once for one, figure out where they are, and then roll it again for the other. It's usually what I do, so I don't overcomplicate it. And then you go ahead and compare those results, right? So you could say an R and a T, or an R and an E, etc. You compare them on the assault combat matrix to determine what happens there. Could be bad for the attacker, could be bad for the defender. The defender gets pushed out of their hex, so you can be attacker breakthrough. Basically, that's advance after combat, which after you advance after combat, you also are going to get to conduct another assault combat against one adjacent enemy occupied hex. And finally, one big one, don't forget defensive fire. When you're moving adjacent to enemy units, they are going to get to do defensive fire against you unless they already have an enemy unit that is adjacent to them, in which case they're not going to be allowed to. Think of it as that enemy unit that's adjacent to them is drawing their attention. So even though there's an enemy now moving next to them, they're not going to be able to focus on them because they already have an enemy that's right there. Okay, again, I hope that helped. Let me know below. I do have a playthrough of the slaughter pen scenario that should be going up in a couple days. So you guys will have a variety of videos to check and watch, check out, watch, and then I'll also have an overview and review of this game. So hope you guys enjoyed. Comment below, let me know. And until next time, later.